Welcome to this compilation of 4 reflective sci-fi short stories. I'll be narrating The Man Outside by Evelyn E. Smith, Lost Art by G.K. Hawke, The Ethical Way by Joseph Farrell, and World Without War by E.G. von Wald. If you find yourself enjoying the stories, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. It helps the channel grow. And there are heaps of other stories on this channel. These are some of the hundreds I've narrated in the past few years. You can get more on the playlists here on YouTube and Substack, but more on that later. For now, let's get to the stories, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. The Man Outside by Evelyn E. Smith. Narrated by William Skye. No one, least of all Martin, could dispute that a man's life should be guarded by his kin, but by those who hadn't been born yet. Nobody in the neighbourhood was surprised when Martin's mother disappeared and Ninian came to take care of him. Mothers had a way of disappearing around those parts, and the kids were often better off without them. Martin was no exception. He'd never had it this good while he was living with his old lady. As for his father, Martin had never had one. He'd been a war baby, born of one of the tides of soldiers, enemies and allies both, that had engulfed the country in successive waves and bought or taken the women. So there was no trouble that way. Sometimes he wondered who Ninian really was. Obviously that story about her coming from the future was just a gag. Besides, if she really was his great-great-granddaughter, as she said, why would she tell him to call her Aunt Ninian? Maybe he was only 11, but he'd been around, and he knew just what the score was. At first he'd thought maybe she was some new kind of social worker, but she acted a little too crazy for that. He loved to bait her, as he had loved to bait his mother. It was safer with Ninian, though, because when he pushed her too far, she would cry instead of mopping up the floor with him. "But I can't understand," he would say, keeping his face straight. "Why do you have to come from the future to protect me against your cousin Conrad?" "Because he's coming to kill you." "Why should he kill me? I ain't done him nothing." Ninian sighed. "He's dissatisfied with the current social order, and killing you is part of an elaborate plan he's formulated to change it. You wouldn't understand." "You're damn right, I don't understand. What's it all about in straight gas?" "Oh, just don't ask any questions," Ninian said petulantly. "When you get older, someone will explain the whole thing to you." So Martin held his peace, because, on the whole, he liked things the way they were. Ninian really was the limit, though. All the people he knew lived in scabrous tenement apartments like his, but she seemed to think it was disgusting. "So if you don't like it, clean it up," he suggested. She looked at him as if he were out of his mind. "Hire a maid, then," he jeered. And darned if that dope didn't go out and get a woman to come clean up the place. He was so embarrassed he didn't even dare show his face in the streets, especially with the women buttonholing him and demanding to know what gave. They tried talking to Ninian, but she certainly knew how to give them the cold shoulder. One day the truant officer came to ask why Martin hadn't been coming to school. Very few of the neighbourhood kids attended classes very regularly, so this was just routine. But Ninian didn't know that, and she went into a real tizzy, babbling that Martin had been sick and would make up the work. Martin nearly did get sick from laughing so hard inside. But he laughed out of the other side of his mouth when she went out and hired a private tutor for him. A tutor in that neighbourhood? Martin had to beat up every kid on the block before he could walk a step without hearing "fancy pants" yelled after him. Ninian worried all the time. It wasn't that she cared what these people thought of her, for she made no secret of regarding them as little better than animals, but she was shy of attracting attention. There were an awful lot of people in that neighbourhood who felt exactly the same way, only she didn't know that either. She was really pretty dumb, Martin thought, for all her fancy lingo. "It's so hard to think these things out without any prior practical application to go by," she told him. He nodded, knowing what she meant was that everything was coming out wrong. But he didn't try to help her. He just watched to see what she'd do next. Already he had begun to assume the detached role of a spectator. When it became clear that his mother was never going to show up again, Ninian bought one of those smallish, almost identical houses that mushroom on the fringes of a city after every war, particularly where intensive bombing has created a number of desirable building sites. "This is a much better neighbourhood for a boy to grow up in," she declared. "Besides, it's easier to keep an eye on you here." And keep an eye on him she did. She, or a rather foppish young man who came to stay with them occasionally. Martin was told to call him Uncle Raymond. From time to time there were other visitors, Uncle Ives and Bartholomew and Olaf, Aunts Ottilie and Grania and Lalage, and many more, all cousins to one another, he was told, all descendants of his. Martin was never left alone for a minute. He wasn't allowed to play with the other kids in the new neighbourhood. Not that their parents would have let them anyway. The adults obviously figured that if a one-car family hired private tutors for their kid, there must be something pretty wrong with him. So Martin and Ninian were just as conspicuous as before. But he didn't tip her off. She was grown up. She was supposed to know better than he did. He lived well. He had food to eat that he'd never dreamed of before, warm clothes that no one had ever worn before him. He was surrounded by more luxury than he knew what to do with. The furniture was the latest new Grand Rapids African modern. There were tidy, colourful Picasso and Braque prints on the walls, and every inch of the floor was modestly covered by carpeting, though the walls were mostly unabashed glass. There were hot water and heat all the time, and a freezer well stocked with food, somewhat erratically chosen, for Ninian didn't know much about meals. The non-glass part of the house was of neat, natural-toned wood, with a neat green lawn in front and a neat party-coloured garden in back. Martin missed the old neighbourhood, though. He missed having other kids to play with. He even missed his mother. Sure, she hadn't given him enough to eat, and she'd beaten him up so hard sometimes that she'd nearly killed him. But then there had also been times when she'd hugged and kissed him and soaked his collar with her tears. She'd done all she could for him, supporting him in the only way she knew how. And if respectable society didn't like it, the hell with respectable society. From Ninian and her cousins, there was only an impersonal kindness. They made no bones about the fact that they were there only to carry out a rather unpleasant duty. Though they were in the house with him, in their minds and in their talk, they were living in another world, a world of warmth and peace and plenty, where nobody worked, except in the government service or the essential professions. And they seemed to think even that kind of job was pretty low class, though better than actually doing anything with the hands. In their world, Martin came to understand, nobody worked with hands. Everything was done by machinery. All the people ever did was wear pretty clothes and have good times and eat all they wanted. There was no devastation, no war, no unhappiness, none of the concomitants of normal living. It was then that Martin began to realise that either the whole lot of them were insane, or what Ninian had told him at first was the truth. They came from the future. When Martin was 16, Raymond took him aside for the talk Ninian had promised 5 years before. "The whole thing's all my brother Conrad's fault. You see, he's an idealist," Raymond explained, pronouncing the last word with distaste. Martin nodded gravely. He was a quiet boy now, his brief past a dim and rather ridiculous memory. Who could ever imagine him robbing a grocery store or wielding a broken bottle now? He still was rather undersized, and he'd read so much that he'd weakened his eyes and had to wear glasses. His face was pallid because he spent little time in the sun, and his speech rather overbred, his mentors from the future having carefully eradicated all current vulgarities. "And Conrad really got upset over the way Earth has been exploiting the not-so-intelligent life forms on the other planets," Raymond continued. "Which is distressing, though of course it's not as if they were people. Besides, the government has been talking about passing laws to do away with the, abuses and things like that, and I'm sure someday everything will come out all right. However, Conrad is so impatient." "I thought in your world machines did all the work," Martin suggested. "I've told you, our world is precisely the same as this one," Raymond snapped. "We just come a couple of centuries or so later, that's all. But remember, our interests are identical. We're virtually the same people. Although it is amazing what a difference 200-odd years of progress and polish can make in a species, isn't it?" He continued more mildly. "However, Even you ought to be able to understand that we can't make machinery without metal. We need food. All that sort of thing comes from the out-system planets. And on those worlds, it's far cheaper to use native labor than to ship out all that expensive machinery. After all, if we didn't give the natives jobs, how would they manage to live? How did they live before? Come to think of it, if you don't work, how do you live now? I don't mean in the now for me, but the now for you, Martin explained laboriously. It was so difficult to live in the past and think in the future. I'm trying to talk to you as if you were an adult, Raymond said, but if you will persist in these childish interruptions... I'm sorry, Martin said. But he wasn't, for by now he had little respect left for any of his descendants. They were all exceedingly handsome and cultivated young people, with superior educations, smooth ways of speaking, and considerable self-confidence, but they just weren't very bright. And he had discovered that Raymond was perhaps the most intelligent of the lot. Somewhere in that relatively short span of time, his line, or more frightening, his race, had lost something vital. Unaware of the near contempt in which his young ancestor held him, Raymond went on blandly. Anyhow, Conrad took it upon himself to feel particularly guilty because, he decided, if it hadn't been for the fact that our great-grandfather discovered the superdrive, we might never have reached the stars. Which is ridiculous, his feeling guilty, I mean. Perhaps a great-grandfather is responsible for his great-grandchildren, but a great-grandchild can hardly be held accountable for his great-grandfather. How about a great-great-grandchild? Martin couldn't help asking. Raymond flushed a delicate pink. Do you want to hear the rest of this, or don't you? Oh, I do, Martin said. He had pieced the whole thing together for himself long since, but he wanted to hear how Raymond would put it. Unfortunately, Professor Farkas has just perfected the time transmitter. Those government scientists are so infernally officious, always inventing such senseless things. It's supposed to be hush-hush, but you know how news will leak out when one is always desperate for a fresh topic of conversation. Anyhow, Raymond went on to explain, Conrad had bribed one of Farkas's assistants for a set of the plans. Conrad's idea had been to go back in time and eliminate their common great-grandfather. In that way there would be no space drive, and hence the terrestrials would never get to other planets and oppress the local aborigines. Sounds like a good way of dealing with the problem, Martin observed. Raymond looked annoyed. It's the adolescent way, he said. To do away with it rather than find a solution. Would you destroy a whole society in order to root out a single injustice? Not if it were a good one otherwise. Well, there's your answer. Conrad got the apparatus built, or perhaps he built it himself. One doesn't inquire too closely into such matters. But when it came to the point, Conrad couldn't bear the idea of eliminating our great-grandfather, because our great-grandfather was such a good man, you know. Raymond's expressive upper lip curled. So Conrad decided to go further back still and get rid of his great-grandfather's father, who'd been, by all accounts, a pretty worthless character. That would be me, I suppose, Martin said quietly. Raymond turned a deep rose. Well, doesn't that just go to prove you mustn't believe everything you hear? The next sentence tumbled out in a rush. I wormed the whole thing out of him, and all of us, the other cousins and me, held a council of war, as it were, and we decided it was our moral duty to go back in time ourselves and protect you. He beamed at Martin. The boy smiled slowly. Of course, you had to. If Conrad succeeded in eliminating me, then none of you would exist, would you? Raymond frowned. Then he shrugged, cheerfully. Well, you didn't really suppose we were going to all this trouble and expense out of sheer altruism, did you? He asked, turning on the charm which all the cousins possessed to a consternating degree. Martin had, of course, no illusions on that score. He had learned long ago that nobody did anything for nothing. But saying so was unwise. We bribed another set of plans out of another of the professor's assistants, Raymond continued, as if Martin had answered, and, induced a handicraft enthusiast to build the gadget for us. Induced, Martin knew, could have meant anything from blackmail to the use of the Iron Maiden. Then we were all ready to forestall Conrad. If one of us guarded you night and day, he would never be able to carry out his plot. So we made our counterplan, set the machine as far back as it would go, and here we are. I see, Martin said. Raymond didn't seem to think he really did. After all, he pointed out defensively, whatever our motives, it has turned into a good thing for you. Nice home, cultured companions, all the contemporary conveniences, plus some handy anachronisms. I don't see what more you could ask for. You're getting the best of all possible worlds. Of course, Ninian was a ninny to locate in a mercantile suburb where any little thing out of the way will cause talk. How thankful I am that our era has completely disposed of the mercantiles. What did you do with them? Martin asked. But Raymond rushed on. Soon as Ninian goes and I'm in full charge, we'll get a more isolated place and run it on a far grander scale. Ostentation, that's the way to live here and now. The richer you are, the more eccentricity you can get away with. And, he added, I might as well be as comfortable as possible while I suffer through this wretched historical stint. So Ninian's going, said Martin, wondering why the news made him feel curiously desolate. Because, although he supposed he liked her in a remote kind of way, he had no fondness for her, or she, he knew, for him. Well, 5 years is rather a long stretch for any girl to spend in exile, Raymond explained, even though our lifespans are a bit longer than yours. Besides, you're getting too old now to be under petticoat government. He looked inquisitively at Martin. You're not going to go all weepy and make a scene when she leaves, are you? No, Martin said hesitantly. Oh, I suppose I will miss her. But we aren't very close, so it won't make a real difference. That was the sad part. He already knew it wouldn't make a difference. Raymond clapped him on the shoulder. I knew you weren't a sloppy sentimentalist like Conrad, though you do have rather a look of him, you know. Suddenly that seemed to make Conrad real. Martin felt a vague stirring of alarm. He kept his voice composed, however. How do you plan to protect me when he comes? Well, each one of us is armed to the teeth, of course, Raymond said with modest pride, displaying something that looked like a child's combination spaceman's gun and death ray, but which Martin had no doubt was a perfectly genuine and lethal weapon. And we've got a rather elaborate burglar alarm system. Martin inspected the system and made 1 or 2 changes in the wiring which he felt would increase its efficiency. But still he was dubious. Maybe it'll work on someone coming from outside this house, but do you think it will work on someone coming from outside this time? Never fear, it has a temporal radius, Raymond replied. Factory guarantee and all that. Just to be on the safe side, Martin said, I think I'd better have one of those guns too. A splendid idea, enthused Raymond. I was just about to think of that myself. When it came time for the parting, it was Ninian who cried. Tears at her own inadequacy, Martin knew, not of sorrow. He was getting skillful at understanding his descendants, far better than they at understanding him. But then they never really tried. Ninian kissed him wetly on the cheek and said she was sure everything would work out all right and that she'd come to see him again. She never did, though, except at the very last. Raymond and Martin moved into a luxurious mansion in a remote area. The site proved a well-chosen one. When the Second Atomic War came, 6 years later, they weren't touched. Martin was never sure whether this had been sheer luck or expert planning. Probably luck, because his descendants were exceedingly inept planners. Few people in the world then could afford to live as stylishly as Martin and his guardian. The place not only contained every possible convenience and gadget, but was crammed with bibelots and antiques, carefully chosen by Raymond and disputed by Martin, for to the man from the future, all available artifacts were antiques. Otherwise, Martin accepted his new surroundings. His sense of wonder had become dulled by now, and the pink pseudo-Spanish castle, architecturally dreadful of course, Raymond had said, but so hilariously typical, impressed him far less than had the suburban split-level aquarium. How about a moat? Martin suggested when they first came. It seems to go with a castle. Do you think a moat could stop Conrad? Raymond asked, amused. No, Martin smiled, feeling rather silly, but it would make the place seem safer somehow. The threat of Conrad was beginning to make him grow more and more nervous. He got Raymond's permission to take 2 suits of armour that stood in the front hall and present them to a local museum, because several times he fancied he saw them move. He also became an adept with the ray gun and changed the surrounding landscape quite a bit with it, until Raymond warned that this might lead Conrad to them. During those early years, Martin's tutors were exchanged for the higher degreed ones that were now needful. The question inevitably arose of what the youth's vocation in that life was going to be. At least 20 of the cousins came back through time to hold one of their vigorous family councils. Martin was still young enough to enjoy such occasions, finding them vastly superior to all other forms of entertainment. "This sort of problem wouldn't arise in our day, Martin," Raymond commented as he took his place at the head of the table, "because unless one specifically feels a call to some profession or other, one just, drifts along happily." "Ours is a wonderful world," Grania sighed at Martin. "I only wish we could take you there. I'm sure you would like it." "Don't be a fool, Grania," Raymond snapped. "Well, Martin, have you made up your mind what you want to be?" Martin affected to think. "A physicist," he said, not without malice. "Or perhaps an engineer." There was a loud, excited chorus of dissent. He chuckled inwardly. "Can't do that," Ives said. "Might pick up some concepts from us. Don't know how, none of us knows a thing about science. But it could happen. Subconscious osmosis, if there is such a thing. That way you might invent something ahead of time. And the fellow we got the plans from particularly cautioned us against that. Changing history. Dangerous." "Might mess up our time frightfully," Bartholomew contributed. "Though to be perfectly frank, I can't quite understand how." "I'm not going to sit down and explain the whole thing to you all over again, Bart," Raymond said impatiently. "Well, Martin?" "What would you suggest?" Martin asked. "How about becoming a painter? Art is eternal, and quite gentlemanly. Besides, artists are always expected to be either behind or ahead of their times." "Furthermore," Ortilli added, "one more artist couldn't make much difference in history. There were so many of them all through the ages." Martin couldn't hold back his question. "What was I actually in that other time?" There was a chilly silence. "Let's not talk about it, dear," Lalage finally said. "Let's just be thankful we've saved you from that." So drawing teachers were engaged, and Martin became a very competent second-rate artist. He knew he would never be able to achieve first rank because, even though he was still so young, his work was almost purely intellectual. The only emotion he seemed able to feel was fear, the ever-present fear that someday he would turn a corridor and walk into a man who looked like him, a man who wanted to kill him for the sake of an ideal. But the fear did not show in Martin's pictures. They were pretty pictures. Cousin Ives, now that Martin was older he was told to call the descendants cousin, next assumed guardianship. Ives took his responsibilities more seriously than the others did. He even arranged to have Martin's work shown at an art gallery. The paintings received critical approval, but failed to evoke any enthusiasm. The modest sale they enjoyed was mostly to interior decorators. Museums were not interested. "Takes time," Ives tried to reassure him. "One day they'll be buying your pictures, Martin. Wait and see." Ives was the only one of the descendants who seemed to think of Martin as an individual. When his efforts to make contact with the other young man failed, he got worried and decided that what Martin needed was a change of air and scenery. "Course, you can't go on the grand tour. Your son hasn't invented space travel yet. But we can go see this world. What's left of it. Tourists always like ruins best, anyway." So he drew on the family's vast future resources and bought a yacht which Martin christened the Interregnum. So they travelled from sea to ocean and from ocean to sea, touching at various ports and making trips inland. Martin saw the civilized world, mostly in fragments, the nearly intact semi-civilized world and the uncivilized world, much the same as it had been for centuries. It was like visiting an enormous museum. He couldn't seem to identify with his own time anymore. The other cousins appeared to find the yacht a congenial headquarters, largely because they could spend so much time far away from the contemporary inhabitants of the planet and relax and be themselves. So they never moved back to land. Martin spent the rest of his life on the Interregnum. He felt curiously safer from Conrad there, although there was no valid reason why an ocean should stop a traveller through time. More cousins were in residence at once than ever before, because they came for the ocean voyage. They spent most of their time aboard ship, giving each other parties and playing an avant-garde form of shuffleboard and gambling on future sporting events. That last usually ended in a brawl because one cousin was sure to accuse another of having got advance information about the results. Martin didn't care much for their company, and associated with them only when not to have done so would have been palpably rude. And though they were gregarious young people for the most part, they didn't court his society. He suspected that he made them feel uncomfortable. He rather liked Ives, though. Sometimes the two of them would be alone together. Then Ives would tell Martin of the future world he had come from. The picture drawn by Raymond and Ninian had not been entirely accurate, Ives admitted. True, there was no war or poverty on Earth proper, but that was because there were only a couple of million people left on the planet. It was an enclave for the highly privileged, highly interbred aristocracy, to which Martin's descendants belonged by virtue of their distinguished ancestry. Rather feudal, isn't it? Martin asked. Ives agreed, adding that the system had, however, been deliberately planned rather than the result of haphazard natural development. Everything potentially unpleasant, like the mercantiles, had been deported. Not only natives living on the other worlds, Ives said as the two of them stood at the ship's rail, surrounded by the limitless expanse of some ocean or other. People, too. Mostly lower classes, except for officials and things. With wars and want and suffering, he added regretfully. Same as in your day. Like now, I mean, he corrected himself. Maybe it is worse, the way Conrad thinks. More planets for us to make trouble on. 3 that were habitable aren't anymore. Bombed. Very thorough job. Oh, Martin murmured, trying to sound shocked, horrified, interested even. Sometimes I'm not altogether sure Conrad was wrong, Ives said after a pause. Tried to keep us from getting to the stars, hurting the people, I expect you could call them people, there. Still, he smiled shamefacedly, couldn't stand by and see my own way of life destroyed, could I? I suppose not, Martin said. Would take moral courage. I don't have it. None of us does except Conrad, and even he. Ives looked out over the sea. Must be a better way out than Conrad's, he said without conviction. And everything will work out all right in the end. Bound to. No sense to anything if it doesn't. He glanced wistfully at Martin. I hope so, said Martin. But he couldn't hope. He couldn't feel. He couldn't even seem to care. During all this time, Conrad still did not put in an appearance. Martin had gotten to be such a crack shot with the ray pistol that he almost wished his descendant would show up so there would be some excitement. But he didn't come, and Martin got to thinking. He always felt that if any of the cousins could have come to realize the basic flaw in the elaborate plan they had concocted, it would have been Ives. However, when the yacht touched at Tierra del Fuego one bitter winter, Ives took a severe chill. They sent for a doctor from the future, one of the descendants who had been eccentric enough to take a medical degree, but he wasn't able to save Ives. The body was buried in the frozen ground at Ushuaia, on the southern tip of the continent, 100 years or more before the date of his birth. A great many of the cousins turned up at the simple ceremony. All were dressed in overwhelming black and showed a great deal of grief. Raymond read the burial service because they didn't dare summon a clerical cousin from the future. They were afraid he might prove rather stuffy about the entire undertaking. He died for all of us, Raymond concluded his funeral eulogy over Ives, so his death was not in vain. But Martin disagreed. The ceaseless voyaging began again. The interregnum voyage to every ocean and every sea. Some were blue, and some green, and some dun. After a while, Martin couldn't tell one from another. Cousin after cousin came to watch over him, and eventually they were as hard for him to tell apart as the different oceans. All the cousins were young, for though they came at different times in his life, they had all started out from the same time in theirs. Only the young ones had been included in the venture. They did not trust their elders. As the years went by, Martin began to lose even his detached interest in the land and its doings. Although the yacht frequently touched port for fuel or supplies, it was more economical to purchase them in that era than to have them shipped from the future. He seldom went ashore, and then only at the urging of a newly assigned cousin anxious to see the sights. Most of the time Martin spent in watching the sea, and sometimes he painted it. There seemed to be a depth to his seascapes that his other work lacked. When he was pressed by the current cousin to make a land visit somewhere, he decided to exhibit a few of his sea paintings. That way he could fool himself into thinking that there was some purpose to this journey. He'd come to believe that perhaps what his life lacked was purpose, and for a while he kept looking for meaning everywhere, to the cousin's utter disgust. "Eat, drink, and be merry, or whatever you Romans say when you do as you do," the cousin, who was rather woolly in history, the descendants were scraping bottom now, advised. Martin showed his work in Italy so that the cousin could be disillusioned by the current crop of Romans. He found that neither purpose nor malice was enough. He was still immeasurably bored. However, a museum bought 2 of the paintings. Martin thought of Ives and felt an uncomfortable pang of a sensation he could no longer understand. "Where do you suppose Conrad has been all this time?" Martin idly asked the current cousin, who was passing as his nephew by now. The young man jumped, then glanced around him uncomfortably. "Conrad's a very shrewd fellow," he whispered. "He's biding his time, waiting until we're off guard, and then, pow, he'll attack." "Oh, I see," Martin said. He had often fancied that Conrad would prove to be the most stimulating member of the whole generation, but it seemed unlikely that he would ever have a chance for a conversation with the young man. More than one conversation, anyhow. "When he does show up, I'll protect you," the cousin vowed, touching his ray gun. "You haven't a thing to worry about." Martin smiled with all the charm he'd had nothing to do but acquire. "I have every confidence in you," he told his descendant. He himself had given up carrying a gun long ago. There was a war in the Northern Hemisphere, and so the interregnum voyaged to southern waters. There was a war in the South, and they hid out in the Arctic. All the nations became too drained of power, fuel and man and will to fight, so there was a sterile peace for a long time. The interregnum roamed the seas restlessly, with her load of passengers from the future, plus one bored and aging contemporary. She bore big guns now because of the ever-present danger of pirates. Perhaps it was the traditionally bracing effect of sea air, perhaps it was the sheltered life, but Martin lived to be a very old man. He was 104 when his last illness came. It was a great relief when the family doctor, called in again from the future, said there was no hope. Martin didn't think he could have borne another year of life. All the cousins gathered at the yacht to pay their last respects to their progenitor. He saw Ninian again, after all these years, and Raymond, all the others, dozens of them, thronging around his bed, spilling out of the cabin and into the passageways and out onto the deck, making their usual clamour, even though their voices were hushed. Only Ives was missing. He'd been the lucky one, Martin knew. He had been spared the tragedy that was going to befall these blooming young people, all the same age as when Martin had last seen them, and doomed never to grow any older. Underneath their masks of woe, he could see relief at the thought that, at last, they were going to be rid of their responsibility. And underneath Martin's death mask lay an impersonal pity for those poor, stupid descendants of his who had blundered so irretrievably. There was only one face which Martin had never seen before. It wasn't a strange face, however, because Martin had seen one very like it in the looking-glass when he was a young man. "You must be Conrad," Martin called across the cabin in a voice that was still clear. "I've been looking forward to meeting you for some time." The other cousins whirled to face the newcomer. "You're too late, Con," Raymond gloated for the whole generation. "He's lived out his life." "But he hasn't lived out his life," Conrad contradicted. "He's lived out the life you created for him, and for yourselves too." For the first time, Martin saw compassion in the eyes of one of his lineage, and found it vaguely disturbing. It didn't seem to belong there. "Don't you realize even yet," Conrad went on, "that as soon as he goes, you'll go too? Present, past, future, wherever you are, you'll go up in the air like puffs of smoke." "What do you mean?" Ninian quavered, her soft, pretty face alarmed. Martin answered Conrad's rueful smile, but left the explanations up to him. It was his show, after all. "Because you will never have existed," Conrad said. "You have no right to existence. It was you yourselves who watched him all the time, so he didn't have a chance to lead a normal life, get married, have children. Most of the cousins gasped as the truth began to percolate through. I knew from the very beginning, Conrad finished, that I didn't have to do anything at all. I just had to wait, and you would destroy yourselves. I don't understand, Bartholomew protested, searching the faces of the cousins closest to him. What does he mean, we have never existed? We're here, aren't we? What? Shut up, Raymond snapped. He turned on Martin. You don't seem surprised. The old man grinned. I'm not. I figured it all out years ago. At first, he had wondered what he should do. Would it be better to throw them into a futile panic by telling them, or to do nothing? He had decided on the latter. That was the role they had assigned to him, to watch and wait and keep out of things, and that was the role he would play. You knew all the time and you didn't tell us? Raymond spluttered. After we'd been so good to you, making a gentleman out of you instead of a criminal? That's right, he snarled. A criminal, an alcoholic, a thief, a derelict. How do you like that? Sounds like a rich, full life, Martin said wistfully. What an exciting existence they must have done him out of. But then he couldn't help thinking. He and Conrad together, of course, had done them out of any kind of existence. It wasn't his responsibility, though. He had done nothing but let matters take whatever course was destined for them. If only he could be sure that it was the better course, perhaps he wouldn't feel that nagging sense of guilt inside him. Strange. Where, in his hermetic life, could he possibly have developed such a queer thing as a conscience? Then we've wasted all this time, Ninian sobbed. All this energy, all this money, for nothing. But you were nothing to begin with, Martin told them. And then, after a pause, he added, I only wish I could be sure there had been some purpose to this. He didn't know whether it was approaching death that dimmed his sight, or whether the frightened crowd that pressed around him was growing shadowy. I wish I could feel that some good had been done in letting you be wiped out of existence, he went on voicing his thoughts. But I know that the same thing that happened to your world and my world will happen all over again. To other people in other times, but again, it's bound to happen. There isn't any hope for humanity. One man couldn't really change the course of human history, he told himself. 2 men, that was. One real, one a shadow. Conrad came close to the old man's bed. He was almost transparent. No, he said, there is hope. They didn't know the time transmitter works 2 ways. I used it for going into the past only once, just this once. But I've gone into the future with it many times. And, he pressed Martin's hand, believe me, what I did, what we did, you and I, serves a purpose. It will change things for the better. Everything is going to be all right. Was Conrad telling him the truth, Martin wondered, or was he just giving the conventional reassurance to the dying? More than that, was he trying to convince himself that what he had done was the right thing? Every cousin had assured Martin that things were going to be all right. Was Conrad actually different from the rest? His plan had worked, and the others hadn't, but then all his plan had consisted of doing was nothing. That was all he and Martin had done. Nothing. Were they absolved of all responsibility merely because they had stood aside and taken advantage of the others' weaknesses? Why, Martin said to himself, in a sense it could be said that I have fulfilled my original destiny, that I am a criminal. Well, it didn't matter. Whatever happened, no one could hold him to blame. He held no stake in the future that was to come. It was other men's future, other men's problem. He died very peacefully then, and since he was the only one left on the ship, there was nobody to bury him. The unmanned yacht drifted about the seas for years, and gave rise to many legends, none of them as unbelievable as the truth. Lost Art by G.K. Hawke. Narrated by William Skye. They lived by and for push-buttons and machines and knew nothing else. But Endicott remembered about the old, old days when a man could save a life without a push button. Stiff fingers of icy, wind-driven snow beat a tattoo on the hull of the cargo ship, filtered through the jagged tears in the metal skin, sifted down over the useless control board with its dead gauges and bank upon bank of push-buttons. Amidship, a wind-thrashed branch screechingly scraped the reverberating hull, and the sound, like the rasp of sliding hatch covers, echoed through the ship. Dazedly, Allison watched the sifting snow settle on the buttons, each one acquiring a grotesque, lopsided conical hat which grew as he stared. He reached forward an already stiffening finger and brushed one of the hats away, and almost idly watched another one form in its place. "Come on, Allison, come on! Snap out of it!" Endicott came out of the passageway into the control room, returned from his inspection of the machinery. "You hurt in the landing?" Allison didn't answer. He shivered and pushed another inquisitive finger at the control board. The finger selected a certain button and pushed it steadily. There was no click of a hidden relay, no whir of little motors springing to life. "You can punch that button or any of the others from now until... It won't do any good. We're dead." The plume of Endicott's frozen breath drifted over Allison's shoulder, merged with the sifting snow. "Dead?" Allison echoed in a sleepwalker's voice. "Dead," he repeated, and jabbed the button again and again. "In a manner of speaking," Endicott's white sandy brows drew together in a frown. "We're off the power cast. Our receiver, I guess." "No power." Allison was following better, was waking up. "That means... Can't you fix it, Chief?" "Nope. I tried, but something in its guts is burned out. No power." Endicott beat his old blue-veined hands together. Allison's frost-numbed fingers picked at the straps on his reclining G-seat, and he stepped to the light metal deck. He shivered and punched the button on the control board again. He was seized by a spasm of uncontrollable shaking. "No power means no heat." Panic crept into his voice. Endicott said nothing, but looked at the tier upon tier of buttons, functionless now. Allison looked at the board too, his narrow shoulders hunched. "They've never failed before," he muttered through chattering teeth. "What?" Endicott seemed bemused. "The buttons! Punch 'em and you always get what you want. Except now!" Now, Endicott said soothingly. "Panic isn't going to help us any. All we have to do is sit tight and wait. They'll send a relief ship out. When?" "In the morning." "Morning, sure. They had us on the viewer, don't forget. They'll know exactly where to look." "They won't be able to locate us in this white stuff." "I tell you, they know precisely where we are. And anyway, the scan viewer will pick us up." "I don't think they'll ever find us." Allison slumped down on his transverse G-seat, stared wide-eyed at the drift forming slowly inside the torn metal of the windward side of the control room. "This white stuff scares me." He shivered, then got up hastily, his boots slipping slightly on the snow-slick decking, and punched the button again. "It's got to work!" he cried and beat on the board with his fist. "Stop that!" Endicott said sharply. There was a crack of a slap in the control room, then silence. In a moment, Endicott said in his soothing voice, "Sorry, Allison. Everything'll be all right. Don't you worry." "If you say so, Chief." Allison stood in the center of the control room, his arms slack by his sides. "We'll be all right," Endicott said. "We have food capsules." "Sure, Chief." "We'll be all right, except..." Endicott peered through the rents in the hull into the storm outside. "All we have to do is sit tight," he added hastily. "We'll freeze tonight without heat." Allison's voice was still breathless with panic. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. There's something way down deep in my mind, something I can't quite get." Endicott still looked out at the storm-thrashed trees, a puzzled expression wrinkling his face. Something from my childhood. I was born a long time before you know, before they set up state conditioning homes for children. Long before they set up this everything from buttons business. Lived with my own people, I did, and I seem to remember. The puzzled expression became a frown of concentration. Or maybe it was something I read a long time ago, he mused. Did what? Allison perked up. Read. You wouldn't know what that was. Everything comes from buttons now. Entertainment, food, light, heat, everything. No, it was from my childhood, I'm sure. I remember my people used to take me out in the country. Endicott mused on while a cloak of snow grew on the shoulders of his jacket and the light began to fade. Out in the country? What for? Nobody goes out there. Allison's eyes gleamed slightly in the growing dusk. For picnics and... Endicott's eyes brightened and one hand clenched. For what? Allison's head thrust forward. What? Endicott snapped, irritated at having his train of thought broken. What did your people take you in the country for? A picnic. Yes, that's it. I remember now. Endicott's words poured out. You know it is forbidden to think of the old days. Shut up. Let me think. You want heat, don't you? It's forbidden to think of the old days, Allison repeated stubbornly. You'll get heat when I report this, in a different way. Shut up! Look, you want to keep from freezing tonight, Endicott glared. All right, come with me and do as I say. Without a backward glance, Endicott crossed the slippery deck and entered the passageway. At the midship cargo hatch, he stopped. How are you going to open it without power? Allison's breath plume shot over Endicott's shoulder. It's locked and unlocked by a button on the control board. Remember, Chief? Stop gloating, Allison. This is for your benefit as well as mine. There's an escape hatch in the control room. That's controlled by power too. Yes, but in these older models, the hatch also has a manual control, as I remember. Endicott moved off toward the control room. Allison hesitated, then followed, and joined Endicott as he began to search the control board. Endicott found the emergency lever for the escape hatch and tugged on it, turning his head to watch the hatch in the side of the hull, back of his seat. The hatch, big enough for one man to pass through at a time, popped, crackling with frost, and stirred slightly. Now, Allison, my boy, let's put our shoulders to it. Endicott was in high spirits again. As soon as the hatch swung open, Endicott put his head and shoulders through the opening, squinting his eyes against the icy snow which swirled past him. He grabbed a handhold on the outside of the hull and pulled his legs through and dropped into the snow alongside the ship. Allison's head and shoulders appeared in the opening, and in a moment he was beside Endicott. Now what? Allison yelled above the wind. Endicott looked toward the clearing in which they had landed, then turned to face the trees around the disabled ship. He waded through the snow to the nearest one and reflectively took hold of a dry branch over his head, tugged it several times as though judging its resiliency, before snapping it off. Now, Allison, you see what I did? Well, you do the same, only gather an armload of branches. When you have them, bring them to me at the ship, and keep on gathering them until I tell you to stop. Allison stood still in the deep snow, peering suspiciously at Endicott through the snow swirl. Is this something from the old... Never mind that now, Allison, Endicott said patiently. Let's not worry about all that twaddle. You want to be warm, don't you? So just do as I say. Allison's eyebrows shot up and lowered instantly, and his face set in stubborn planes. If this is from the old days, I'm not sure I want any part of it. He looked furtively over his shoulders at the gloomy woods. There are no conditioning committees here, Allison, Endicott said testily. Get on with it. Allison took a few reluctant steps toward the nearest tree. Endicott started back to the ship with his branch, looking back over his shoulder. No, Allison. See those green needles? It won't do at all. Dry branches, Alison, dry branches. The whipping wind carried Endicott's words over the few yards. I can't see how these branches are going to keep us warm. It seems like a lot of useless trouble getting them, Alison said sulkily, suspicion and fear unabated. Endicott didn't answer. Instead, he went to the side of the ship away from the wind and began tramping the snow down into a flat, hard floor. He broke his branch into short lengths over his knee, then, in a nearly forgotten gesture, slapped at his uniform until he remembered that he had no pockets. For a moment he stood still, his eyes roving over the side of the ship until it came to one of the jagged tears. With a little self-congratulatory chuckle, he began scraping one of the lengths of wood over the torn metal, catching the splinters and shavings in the palm of one hand. Alison dropped his armload of branches by the ship, waged an inner battle between fear of the unknown and curiosity, in which curiosity won, and stood watching Endicott arrange the branches in a crib around the neatly piled shavings. Endicott, on one knee by the crib, worked steadily, laying the pieces of wood with care and a returning sense of sureness with only brief pauses to flex his freezing fingers. Finally, with a smile of satisfaction on his face, Endicott got to his feet, and the nearly forgotten gesture at the pocketless uniform was repeated. Slowly, Endicott's lined face altered. He looked hastily at the watchful Alison, and hastily looked away. He looked at the completed crib, and his tongue licked his lips. He looked along the side of the damaged ship, and his eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Finally, he looked into the swirl of the icy snow, and he shivered. His hands seized their pawing, fell slowly to hang slack by his sides. He was not smiling as he turned away. "What were you looking for?" Alison asked curiously. "I just remembered something else," said Endicott. His voice was very soft in the stillness. "We used to have something called a match to start those picnic fires." If you're enjoying the stories, hit the like button to help the channel continue growing. Thanks. The Ethical Way by Joseph Farrell. Narrated by William Skye. There is a way around every taboo, knock on wood, but just watch out that the wood doesn't knock back. "Is it time?" Jarth Rowland asked anxiously. Pilot Lan Barda pushed him gently back into a seat. "No, but very soon. And be calm, you're jumpier than a human." "But we've waited so long. Yes, a long time. And I am anxious to get home." Lan peered calmly out of his vehicle. They were hovering in Earth's upper atmosphere at the permitted limit. "Be patient. These people have almost reached the critical point. We'll get the signal before long." Jarth Rowland popped out of his chair and danced about in nervous excitement. "Won't it be dangerous? For us, I mean, going down into that radioactive atmosphere? And how about them? Will any of them live? Suppose we wait too long?" Lan Barda laughed. He was a husky humanoid, pinkish of skin and completely hairless like all galactics. He slapped Jarth Rowland's back. "We have experts watching. These humans have used 4 kobold bombs and plenty of smaller stuff. The fallout is close to the danger point. Our observers will know just when we can move in because..." He winked and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're using automatically controlled instruments." "Oh my!" Jarth Rowland clapped his hands to his cheeks. "But those are robots, and the use of robots is against religion." "I know, Jarth, but we won't be using them much longer, will we?" He poked a playful finger into Jarth's ribs. "We'll have slaves, and it'll be completely ethical." Jarth Rowland winced. "Must you use that word slaves, Lan? It sounds so..." He waved his hands. Lan laughed again. "Be honest with yourself, Jarth. You're out to make a few dopolins for yourself as a slave raider." "An entrepreneur," said Jarth, "in personal services." Lan Barda became serious. "There's the signal. It's time to go down. Let's go, Jarth, before somebody else gets them all. An hour later, it was Lanbarda's turn to be nervous. He watched a needle creep into the red zone. Hurry, Jarth. We've been on this planet long enough. That 5th cobalt bomb is sending the index up fast. Can't you skip these last few? Oh no. Very unethical to leave these 3 here to die. Must take a small chance, you know. Besides, see the sign on that taxi? Just married. A fine young couple. And a fine young taxi driver. Couldn't sleep if I didn't help these 3. Couldn't sleep thinking of the profit you'd passed up. Here, let me take that one. We have to get out of here fast. Jarth Rowland fluttered anxiously about the pilot until they were safely above the poisoned atmosphere. How many? He asked. Did we fill the ship? Lanbarda checked off items on his clipboard. 1,003 with these last ones. You'll make a good profit. Not so much the profit. Oh no, more than that involved. Ethics and religion, Lan. Yes. With all these servants, our people will never have to use robots. They'll be relieved of routine labour and can devote their lives to art and science. And it's all ethical. Oh yes, for these people were doomed. Want to know something, Jarth? Lanbarda bent closer and whispered wickedly. This ship has automatic controls. Has to. No living being has fast enough reactions to handle an interstellar ship. All robot-driven, at least in part. Robots? May we be forgiven. Jarth stared suspiciously at Lanbarda. Sometimes, Lan, I think you are an agnostic. The pilot became more serious. Maybe, Jarth. In our work we must use robots. We joke about it, but it goes against all galactic belief to let a machine think for us. Maybe that's why we pilots are so cynical. A galactic is always ethical, said Jarth Rowland solemnly. This affair, for example. We let these poor creatures of Earth handle their own affairs with no interference until they doomed themselves. It was unethical to intervene a minute sooner. Yes, the ethical way, and I feel better for it and proud to be a galactic. That's true, said Lanbarda. A galactic wouldn't feel right being a member of the dominant race of the galaxy if he didn't help the less fortunate. Jarth Rowland had prepared a centre on his estate for the slaves. The demand was greater than the supply. He chatted happily with his wife. An excellent investment, Shala, yes. And the highest group council wants us to lease them out by the day for the present instead of selling outright. She nodded. That's the fair way. Everybody can have a turn having a slave. And, said Jarth, rubbing his pink hands, we'll collect every day and still hold title. Will they multiply fast? Asked Shala. So there will be enough for all? They always did on Earth, yes. By the time we pass our estate on to our son, this investment will have multiplied in value. At the centre, the slaves clustered about the bulletin boards to read the slave code. The 3 who had been brought aboard last stood together. Laurent Crotier and his wife Jean were still in their wedding clothes, and Sam, the taxi driver, was in uniform. They read the 7 articles of the slave code. We have to work 12 hours a day, Lauren observed, and have off every 7th day. This could be worse. We'll keep our eyes open and wait for our chance, Sam piped up. Someday we'll make a break out of here. Yeah, said Jean. And remember, Frenchie, no kids. 9 months later, Laurent Jr. was born. Before the blessed event, Laurent went to Jarth Rowland with a complaint. She can't do it, work 12 hours a day now. You have to change the rules. By God, if my wife die account of this, I gon' kill you, Jarth Rowland. Jarth Rowland waltzed about nervously, biting his fingernails. No, we do not want her to have trouble. No, she will need proper rest. There is a meeting of the highest group council right now concerning this. Others have the same problem. But yes, I will relieve her of work without waiting for the council's decision. Tell your wife to stay home, Laurent, until the baby is born. Laurent pushed his luck. And after that, too. A kid got to have a mother. I do the work for 3, you let my wife take care of the family." "Oh, this is a problem." Jarth Rowland rubbed his fingers unhappily over his bald scalp. "Some of the other females are in the same condition. But it is like planting a crop. One labours hard at the beginning to reap a great harvest later. We will work this out." The next day, 15 articles amending the code arrived and were posted. Laurent read happily. "Now," he said to Jean, "it is the law. You will stay home and have the baby." "And for such further period," she said, "as is considered necessary. You sure told him off, Frenchie." She squeezed his arm affectionately and his chest went out a little. "And remember," she said, "this is the last one." "Look at this rule," said Sam. "All kids must be educated. I'm only," he winked at them, 13. It's off the job and back to school for me." Laurent blinked. "By gar, Sam, I think you've been shaving pretty near as long as I am. But if Jarth Rowland asks me, I say I know Sam is 13. Jarth Rowland came along to explain the amendments. "We don't want the slaves to be ignorant. Oh no, it will be worth extra effort and expense to reap the harvest. The slaves will work at many specialized tasks. Even personal servants will read and write letters and help at business and keep accounts. Yes, indeed. We must assign some slaves to teaching." About the time Laurent Jr. started school, Laurent led a delegation to Jarth Rowland. "We got some complaint to make. These food servings pretty small lately. We work hard, we have to eat more." Jarth Rowland's facial skin had developed wrinkles, though the Galactic's lifespan was comparable to a human's, and he was only about 40. He fidgeted. "I am sorry. Oh yes, sorry. There have been delays in food shipments, the same trouble all over. Too many excuse from the workforce, you know. Most of the women are pregnant or have children and teachers and special assignments, but things will improve, believe me. Yes, you will soon find an improvement. Yes, very soon." The delegation talked it over outside Jarth Rowland's house. "He's been letting himself go," said a woman. "Did you notice how thin he's become? And the same with his family." Laurent reflected. "To raise a lot of kids is hard. My father, he worked like hell all the time. Raise his own food, don't depend on nobody. I think that land back of the centre, we should plough it up and put in some potatoes." "On our own time?" Sam exclaimed. Laurent chuckled. "Well, Sam, you got no kids. You just a young boy 18 years old. By God, I think you have grey hair when you're 21. The others joined the laughter. Sam's lie about his age had boomeranged. He had been kept in school and denied permission to marry until he was officially 18 a few months ago. Laurent fingered his chin thoughtfully. "I think we look over that land. Maybe we get some time out from our regular work, we do some farming." Before the blow-up on Earth, the Galactics had made occasional landings to gather animals and seeds of food plants. Certain centers were put under government control to grow food for the slaves. The people at Jarth Rowland's center saw that this arrangement was breaking down because of the increasing slave population and the diversion of labor to child raising. They looked over the piece of land and Laurent okayed it. They went back to Jarth Rowland. He approved at once. "Oh, indeed. I can obtain all the equipment you'll need. Get started right away. We can grow a good part of our own food. Yes. I am sure it will work out." "We gon' need some time for work the farm," Laurent pointed out. "Oh? I thought maybe in your spare time. You want to kill us?" Sam demanded. "Put us on an extra job after working us hard 12 hours a day?" "But there's so little coming in. Still, maybe you're right. Worth the extra trouble and expense now. Building for the future, that's the idea." Jarth Rowland notified his group leader of the arrangement, and it percolated swiftly up through the hierarchy to the council of the highest group heads who directed policy for the entire galaxy. There were 9 of them, and they talked over this development. "I approve. We should have done it this way from the beginning." "Of course. but certain advocates of government control insisted on public ownership of the food farms.
What do you mean, certain advocates? If you mean me, be galactic enough to say so.
I intend no personal offence to anybody, but there is bound to be inefficiency in any government project.
The chairman pounded the table. Stay with the subject. It has been suggested that each centre grow part of its food. I am in favour.
But it cuts down the available labour force. We're having complaints now about the shortage of slaves.
Think of the future. I admit the present situation is difficult. It's like raising a herd of prize cattle, all expense and no profit at first. Then the herd is built up and suddenly you're rich.
But we're putting so much into it.
The more we put in, the more we take out. And they're multiplying rapidly. Remember our new goal of 2 slaves for each galactic, 1 for the day shift and 1 for the night. It's the only way our people can live a decent life, freed from routine labour, devoting themselves to art and science.
That's right. We work so our children can lead the better life. It's worth some sacrifice.
The chairman stood up. Most of us seem willing to endure a little hardship now for the benefit of our children. I suggest we endorse this new procedure.
Laurent Jr. married the girl next door. Laurent celebrated the wedding with a barrel of beer he had brewed on the farm. Sam became glassy-eyed and lectured the young couple. Just wait for the right time. Rise up and capture their spaceships. That's what we'll do. We'll go back to Earth and then let them try to get us off it again. But Earth is dead, Laurent Jr. objected. We can't live there. Poisonous radiation. By gar, Laurent drained another brew. You believe everything they tell you, huh? We gon' show them sometime. Like Sam says, not now, but sometime. Maybe me and Sam don't do it, but don't you kids forget. You not gon' be slaves always. You watch for the right time, like Sam says.
His son looked dubious.
But what you told me about Earth doesn't sound so good. Like the way you were so cold and hungry in that shack in Canada. And Mama walking up 5 flights in New York after working all day in the garment factory. And all those wars. Why did you people spend half your time shooting each other, Dad?
Laurent belched indignantly. By gar, boy, we was free. We don't have no galactic stand over us, do this, do that. We was free.
We don't work so hard, said his son. And look at old Jarth Rowland and the others out there. They've given us the day off, but the galactics are all busy in the fields. Everybody has to work, Dad. Laurent looked through a slight haze at the masters labouring in the potato fields. Farm work and teaching and other special assignments had created a shortage of personal slaves. Jarth Rowland gave preference in leasing slaves to those who came and helped him at the centre. Since having a personal slave was a mark of prestige among the galactics, many of those labouring on the farm were from the highest levels of society. They don't know nothing about raised potatoes, Laurent grumbled. We put in complaint, by damn. We want each one have his own land. I work like jackass. I want to get paid for it. The highest group council was in session. One member was explaining. It's the custom of tipping slaves. At first, those who could get a slave were so happy that they often gave him a few coins. Now the custom is firmly established. Anybody who doesn't tip a slave is considered cheap. I do it, and so do you.
Of course. What's wrong with giving them a few polins now and then, or a dopolin or 2 when they have a baby or a wedding?
Nothing wrong with it in itself, but they don't spend anything. We supply their food and clothing. Nothing else we have seems to appeal to them. The money goes out of circulation. It's estimated that half the money in the galaxy is being hoarded by slaves.
What? That's impossible. Just from those small tips?
Small tips, but day after day, year after year. Add up sometime what you've given and multiply by the number who've been giving it.
Then that's behind our economic troubles. A currency shortage. Can we take it away from them?
Of course not. Besides being unethical, it would turn them against us. They wouldn't understand.
Then we'll abolish tipping.
Too late.
What we need is an ethical way of getting back that currency. A new member spoke. I understand that on Earth these slaves were often addicted to alcohol, gambling, and various alkaloids. Perhaps we could introduce these items under government control, of course. He stopped. 8 pair of eyes were blazing at him. You're new here, the chairman said. If you ever make another suggestion like that... They pondered. The chairman fingered some papers. Here's a suggestion. The slaves have been petitioning for the right to own land. It seems to be the only thing they'll spend their money for. Impossible! But maybe we could limit the holdings and have the land subject to condemnation by the government at a fair price. The chairman called for order. Let's argue this out. Remember, the slaves will need time to work their land. Since their workday is down to 9 hours, we'll have to arrange something. Jean had been complaining about the lumps in the mattress. When Lauren took them out, there was enough in galactic currency to buy a piece of land in his name and hers, plus a plot for each of the children and a new mattress as well. Sam was suspicious. They're out to get what little we've been able to save, Lauren. They can take the land any time for what they call a fair price. Fair! Fine chance they'll be fair about it. But Lauren kept the land and was even able to buy a piece for each grandchild, although they arrived faster and faster as his own large family grew up and married. One day Jean called him to a new house at the edge of the widely expanded centre to see the latest arrival. Lauren poked a finger at the squalling creature. So I'm another grandpa. Which one this? This time you're a great-grandpa, Frenchie. This is Lauren Fourth. You mean we getting that old? By damn. Well, I'm buying a piece of land too. So much new building, this land be worth plenty when he grows up. The 512th Amendment permitted slaves to retire at 65. Lauren was a leading real estate dealer by that time. He had 23 children and more grandchildren than he could count. The centre was grown to a city, its main street running through what had been his first farm. Sometimes Lauren relaxed in his rocking chair and needled Sam. By gar, Sam, if you're not the oldest looking man of 55 I ever see. I think you're 100 years old when you retire. When you having that revolution? The day will come if we keep after the young ones. But damn it, Lauren, it's hard to talk any sense into them. Some of them can't even understand me. Well, they all talk galactic, Sam. My grandson, he call himself Lauren Cote. But these young people, they have to live their own lives. Hey, look at old Jarth Rowland up there washing his windows. Old guy should retire, Sam. I'm going to see a couple of my boys give him a hand. But Jarth Rowland died before he could afford to retire and was replaced by his only grandson, Jarrow Kogar. Lauren and Jean passed on shortly after, leaving nearly 400 descendants. Jarrow Kogar was a newly married galactic in his early 30s. He moved into the mansion and talked things over with his wife. Don't see how we can afford a child right now. Wouldn't be fair to the child. Things will improve in a few years. Of course, she said. We're young. We'll have time to start our family. If we wait, we'll be able to give them more. They held similar conversations later and one day realized it was too late. Jarrow Kogar died in his 60s. His widow directed the centre for several more years. The slaves liked her and took good care of her. She left them the estate when she died. Lauren Crotalu protested to the authority that the slaves didn't want the estate, but the group heads ruled it legal under Amendment 1486, especially since no relatives could be located. Lauren left the centre and moved to another city where he found a galactic couple who wanted a slave. He and his family served the galactic couple for many years. This couple, like Jarrow Kogar and his wife, were childless, and when they both died, Lauren and his wife were very grieved. After the funeral, Lauren went into the city. He returned hours later, tired and depressed. It's no use, he told his wife.
There's not an unattached galactic in the area. We might get a few hours' work a week with one, but we can't have one to ourselves." "But Lauren, everybody in our set works for a galactic." "I know," he said miserably, "but it's no use. There must be 50 slaves for every galactic. I've taken a job at the spaceship factory. It's the best I can do." Membership on the highest group council had become a killing job. Chief problem was the revision of the slave code, which had 3,697 articles. After trying for years to simplify the code, the council members called in Lauren Cravallo to fill a vacancy and take over the job. Lauren was known and liked by galactic and slave alike for his brilliant essays on the master-slave relationship. While he was on the council, the Cerberan affair broke out. The Cerberans, an intelligent saurian race from a globular cluster, exploded into the galaxy in vast numbers. Military action became necessary. "We can handle them," Lauren told the council. "Our factories are mobilized and we have any number of spacemen. We have robot instruments for fighting that are better than anything they have. We can carry the war to their home planets." Some of the galactics objected. "But the use of robots is forbidden. We can't fight the Cerberans with robot-controlled weapons." "Don't worry, sir," Lauren said kindly. "We slaves will take care of it. Our form of religion doesn't prohibit robots unless they are in the shape of a man. We think of real robots as being human in shape." One of the galactics rose. "I know you're right, but my conscience won't let me vote for robots in any form. Therefore, I am resigning from the council." A second rose, then a third and fourth. They looked at each other and one spoke for the group. "We are also resigning. I suggest that 4 slaves be appointed in our places for the duration of the war. Then they will have a majority and no galactic need violate his conscience by voting for the use of robots." The Cerberans were crushed, but the infested area was huge and the invasion of the globular cluster took time. The war emergency lasted 50 years. When it was over, the slaves called on the galactics to take back control of the government. But the widespread use of robot mechanisms in the war had caused a reaction among the galactics. Their consciences simmered and a wave of orthodoxy swept over their race. There was difficulty in persuading galactics to leave their home planets to sit on the council because faster-than-light ships used robot controls. The slaves scoured the planet that housed the council and kept 2 or 3 seats filled with galactics for a while. But they were generally old and they died, and most of them were unmarried or childless. Lauren Crote, 12th generation slave, sat in his home chatting with a friend from far-off Pornalu 6. Being in the space-shipping business, he had many friends throughout the galaxy. His wife answered the door and a pink humanoid shuffled in, mumbling greetings, and went into the other room. He was middle-aged, studious, and bespectacled, and he wore a wig. Lauren's friend watched him curiously. "Haven't seen one of them in years, Lauren. We have a reservation for the poor devils on my planet. Don't reproduce very fast, you know, and they may become extinct. Too bad, they're so likable. Always so ethical and conscientious." "I know," Lauren nodded. "We let poor Vendro make a few Dopolins tutoring our son. He's very intelligent and a good teacher. I like to help them all I can, the only ethical thing to do. I wouldn't feel like a slave if I didn't give poor Vendro a break." "That's true," said his friend. "A slave wouldn't feel right being a member of the dominant race of the galaxy if he didn't help the less fortunate." Just a friendly reminder to hit the like button if you're enjoying the video. Thanks. World Without War by E.G. von Wald. Narrated by William Skye. Cooperation was all right back in the Dark Ages, but this was an era of superculture and high psi intelligence. And love was no laughing matter. People who cooperated, even biologically, were unlawful and... Mark knew he shouldn't stop. He was already late for Jeanette's birthday party, but the sight of 3 people out in the open like this was too much. He pulled around and hovered over the undulating flow of glassy magma, frozen on its way to the long, dry Potomac riverbed with its shallow caverns and fascinating mile-wide potholes. Just under an overhanging cliff of half-vitrified soil were 2 cars, obviously damaged. The 3 men were standing beside them. Mark laughed out loud. It was not often that one found 3 people at once, and so close to each other. The scene there, with the long slanting rays of milky sunlight glancing off the ribbing of the flats and sparkling through the million brittle shards of collapsed debris, filled him with a certain poetic exultation. "By the stars," he murmured to himself happily. Bubbling with good humour, he slipped down a little closer to the hole, staying up hard against the overhanging cliff. He was feeling too cheerful to use his rightful advantage over them, and decided to use a handgun, since they had nothing better. This was a mistake, of course. He was only moving along at 100 miles an hour now. Too slow for safe shooting, particularly with the bumpy air in the hole. But he happily disregarded this as he pushed open a viewport and blazed away with a Zuz pistol. Almost immediately the ship lurched in the uneven air, and he could see the tiny thin trace of violet as it swept up and away off the targets. One of the men went down, sliced cleanly in 2, but the others had seen him. Mark cursed mildly, some of his high good humour gone, and pulled the car about for another run. The chronometer pinged warningly at him, notifying him that he was now a full hour late for Jeanette's birthday party, but the code required the second try. There was nothing that required hand weapons for this, however, and he slipped his strong young hands around the main gun control. A single burst of violet, and one of the men vanished in a puff of steam. Good and clean, he told himself with satisfaction. But the last man opened his pistol onto Broadbeam, burning a red flare of general destruction at him. Mark veered around and bore down sharply for the last burst. He had to get it over with and on to Jeanette. But the deadly Broadbeam swept below the car, evacuating the air and throwing the vehicle momentarily out of control. Close behind, the cliff became suddenly alive as the beam engaged it, bubbling and spewing out huge gouts of molten rock. The aircar burst into a brief, brilliant, sodium-coloured fire and fell, with Mark burning inside of it, yelling and screaming in pain. It took almost 5 seconds before the charred brain of Mark's body stopped functioning. Then it released him. He was conscious of the humming of his transmitter. Almost immediately, the remembered pain brought perspiration running down inside the helmet into his eyes. He reached up and removed the headpiece with unsteady hands, groaning softly. It had been some decades since he had last been involved in trouble like this. Killed, yes, but in a painless, fair fight. Being burned to death was no joke. And that body had been one of his best, with the finest reflex sensory system manufactured. The machine purred softly beside him. He thought suddenly and emptily of Jeanette and stood up. "Damn," he muttered, crossing the floor, feeling the pleasant warmth of the soft plastic under his feet. "Damn, damn, damn." He stopped before the transparent cover of a storage cabinet, gazing sourly at its contents. 11 humanoid forms were stiffly erect behind the cover, all broadly resembling him in feature, and differing only in such minor things as height, hair, perhaps the colour of the eyes. Each bore the scars of some past clumsiness or accident. "Damn," Mark said again. "That was the only decent body I had to wear. Now what do I do?" He went into the next room and bathed himself in the tepid, perfumed mist that fell perpetually from its domed ceiling. If it were anybody but Jeanette, there would be no problem. He just would have to shoot off a quick RT explaining the situation and excusing himself. Nobody would have minded, least of all himself, particularly a no-fight affair like this one was supposed to be. But not Jeanette. Oh, Jeanette. Mark grinned and rubbed the pleasant fluid over his well-cared-for skin. Oh yes, Jeanette. There was something about Jeanette that he could not quite put his finger on, but it was good. It was wondrously good. Like the bodies she wore. No matter what it was always perfect. She just had the knack of dressing well. Idly, he wondered what her proto-body was like. There must be some resemblance, of course. That was the law. Identification was very important, and few manufacturers would violate that even as a simple matter of good taste. But there still would be considerable difference. As he thought about it, he got a strange wistful feeling that he did not quite understand. There was a sort of sadness about it. Jeanette seemed oddly different from other people. He liked her too much. Guiltily, he brushed the thoughts aside. Anyway, it didn't matter, he told himself. Due to his carelessness in that last fight, he probably wouldn't even see her tonight since he had nothing to wear. He stalked out of the shower and gazed again at the bodies in the storeroom. The only halfway decent one there was that 6-foot black fellow with the little ears. It used to be his favourite until he got it smashed one night during a party at his nearest neighbour's. A half-smile tugged at Mark's lips as he recalled the incident. That had been a no-fight party too, but he had managed to smuggle in a small bomb and set it off right in the middle of the main bedroom. There were at least 10 couples there since it was a big party, and none of them lived. The trouble was Mark had been pretty badly smashed up himself and just managed to get away without losing his body. Now the thing was all scarred up and practically useless for anything except manual labour. Mark shook his head disgustedly. There was nothing to do but send off the RT to Jeanette. But this was her birthday. He caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection from his transmitter housing and automatically straightened his shoulders a little, then laughed at his image. Then he stopped and contemplated himself further. There was one thing he could do. Many years before, he had an exact duplicate of himself produced when the vogue for copper-coloured bodies was at its height. Since then, the fashion had changed back to the pink, but that old job must still be around somewhere. He hated to do it, though. He had never liked that body. It had been just too accurate, and every time he wore it, it embarrassed him. It had been almost as if he were going outside in his proto-body, which of course nobody did. People used their own bodies hundreds of years ago, but it was most uncivilized. Besides, it was tiring, and dangerous too. Yet, was it more fun? He wondered. He simply had to make Jeanette's party. Otherwise he wouldn't see her for months at least, and the thought of that made him feel funny in his stomach. Mark grinned again, admiring her image in his mind, and set about his catalogue to find the fundamental frequency of that old copy of himself. Fuse it, he told himself resolutely. Nobody would know it was an exact duplicate. He located the data and set it up in the transmitter. He had no idea where the body was, but that would take care of itself if it was still in good shape. Placing the helmet on his head, he punched the controls and relaxed back on the table. 2 levels below, under a pile of dust-covered trash, the body became suddenly conscious. Mark opened his eyes and looked around, recognition slowly returning. He had forgotten all about this old room, but then one could hardly remember everything about a full shelter system, what with the hundreds of compartments, endless automatic equipment, and innumerable connecting passages. Whoever it was who built this one sure had liked complexity. He bathed and carefully braided the long blue-black hair, simulating somewhat the fashion of the day, and spent some time adjusting a purple scarf over his left shoulder. The purple scarf was sort of a trademark with him, and Jeanette always admired it. Purple was her favourite colour. He made a joke out of it and called it their colour, which was typical of the strange, dangerous behaviour she engendered in him. Mark was a little worried as he plunged up toward the stratosphere in his extra car. This time he kept clearly in his mind the fact that this was his last serviceable body and he could take no chances with it getting ruined. Even if he saw a whole multitude of people all clustered together, he would ignore them, he told himself. Halfway there, however, he spotted a peculiar marking on the scope and detoured. The peculiar marking followed him. Anxiously, he looked out a clear view panel but could see nothing in the cold, mist-laden night. The marking grew more definite as he hesitated. It was another car, and there could be no question what it was after. A shot at Mark. He cursed and sucked in his breath, making quick calculations. There was a rolling billow of cobalt fog off to one side, a whole bank of the stuff. Somebody apparently had been having a little game nearby. It was still hot enough, according to his indicators, to discharge anything the other car sent after him, and he would have the added advantage of being invisible to the other man's instruments. The only trouble was, once in the fog, he couldn't see anything either, and could be ambushed without difficulty on the way out. The marking on the scope became more definite, and the question settled itself as the other car came between Mark and the cloud. Growling with irritation, Mark swung around and sent a wide-angle beam in the direction of his pursuer, watching nervously as the indicators described the pitiful short range of his fire at this setting. The assailant veered off, however, scurrying into the cobalt cloud. Mark grinned. He knew the man would expect him to wait for him to come out, so he swooped down at max acceleration toward the surface. In 5 minutes, he was signalling into Jeanette's shelter for permission to enter. There were servants everywhere, mechanical things controlled by electronics and not alive, although they looked it. This was Jeanette's specialty. She owned a factory that manufactured them for mining on the scalding plains of Mercury, and these had been superficially remodeled to act as servants. There was the usual government man there too, running the party. He strutted around under his official sash with ill-concealed self-importance. "Hey, you there! Wait a minute!" he called to Mark, waving a Zuz pistol in his direction. "Yes?" Mark hesitated, eyed the pistol, and obeyed. "That scarf! Get it off!" the man ordered sternly as he approached. The Zuz pistol was level and steady. "Why?" Mark demanded. "It's just a scarf. I always wear one." "You know why," the other man said coldly. "This is a teetotal party. If I let somebody slip a weapon or something in, it would be an awful brawl in no time. You know how people are." The man was right, of course. You can conceal a lot of things in the fabric of a sheer scarf. Reluctantly, Mark undid the catch and handed it over. "Okay, you can pick it up at the entrance when you leave." The officer's amused eyes wrinkled as he looked Mark up and down. "Say, that's a pretty nice job you've got there, man. Mind if I ask who made it?" "It's pretty good," Mark said cautiously. "It's custom-made to a private specification." The officer grinned good-naturedly. "Sure, I understand. That's all right. I'm not from the revenue department. I don't have to do anything about bootlegging." "I don't mean that," Mark protested. "There's nothing illegal." The man waved his disregard anyway. "Forget it. It's a nice one, though. And that copper colour is coming back soon, too. These fashions run in cycles, you know." "Yes," Mark murmured diffidently. "I thought so too." "Sure." The officer eyed it speculatively for a moment. 2.01 centimetre naval, isn't it? They're the best, of course. Mark nodded shortly, looking away from the talkative officer, hoping he would stop. But the man went on. "And I don't have any use for these new non-feeders they've been coming out with recently." "No," Mark mumbled. "It's all right to fix it so that the food is not necessary, and it really is a bother to have to feed these old models whether you want to or not. But sometimes you like to eat something just for the fun of it, and with the non-feeder models there's no receptacle for it." Mark nodded, his eyes searching the huge ante-room, gazing hopefully between the moving ranks of robot servants. Then he saw her and caught his breath. Jeanette. His lips formed a low whistle in time-honoured acclamation of excellence. The officer followed his gaze and agreed. "Yes," he said in a low voice, "that girl is really something. Private spec for everything, and she sure knows how to use it. Take that little golden job she's wearing tonight. Nothing to it, but with her, it's terrific." He was right. Jeanette was wearing a slender, soft-looking golden little body that Mark had never seen before, but it was a real prize. Being hostess, she could have clothes on and sported a half-dozen little bracelets and a jet-black bandana around her throat. The thing draped down over her left breast, and the whole effect was really quite stunning. "Oh, Mark!" she exclaimed, running up with an odd sort of breathlessness. "You're late." "Sorry, Jeanette," he replied. "Ran into a little trouble and had to go back for another body." "You must have missed," she said with amused accusation. "I'm surprised at you." Oh, there were 3 of them, he protested, and the last one used a broad beam. Never mind, I forgive you, she told him. Come along, let's go look at my garden. Mark grinned happily. Wonderful idea, but what about your guests? Are you just going to leave them like that? This is my birthday, she said. They can amuse themselves. Then she pulled him down and put her lips to his ear. Besides, she whispered, I've got an identical copy with electronic works. No one will even know I've left unless they get too friendly with it. Pretty clever, Mark admitted thoughtfully, but I wouldn't always be so ready to break the law like that. Who's to know except you, Mark? She looked up at him with burning, gold-flecked eyes. You wouldn't tell anybody, would you? Mark shook his head uncomfortably. All right, then. They entered the elevator that took them down another half-mile to the central living quarters of the ancient shelter. It had been built early in the Flux period and remodelled several times. It was one of the best equipped on the planet. Tell me, Jeanette said, gazing appreciatively at the heavy bronze shoulders, where on earth did you get that? Oh, it was just lying around somewhere, Mark mumbled. I bet, she said, but it's nice. I like it. Mark just grinned at her, happy for the moment, secure in the knowledge that it would be impossible for her ever to know that it was really identical with his proto-body. Not that it would matter, just so long as it was artificial. He listened to the humming of the elevator for a few minutes. When it stopped, the door vanished and the 2 of them moved out into a sea of wild, colourful beauty. High above them was a simulated sun that made as good a substitute for the real thing as had been developed since the underground movement. Bright, Mark commented. Oh, that's right. I've been forcing some Venerian puffers and scentflowers and raised the radiation level 10 decibels. They always do well under a strong sun, you know. She left his arm and moved to a control panel beside the entrance to the elevator. She manipulated something and the sun dimmed a little. There, she turned around. Better? Mark looked at the landscape, then back to her. He grinned. Too much light. Oh, you, she murmured. She touched the controls and the sun disappeared, being replaced by a huge, mellow moon that sailed majestically on the simulated horizon. It was impossible to tell it from the real thing. How's that? A little dark. Ignoring his comment, she came back and took his arm and they went strolling across the flowers and grass. Don't you like my moon, Mark? Sure, it's fine. Sort of aphrodisiac, of course, but isn't that what it's for? Jeanette asked innocently. I dunno. I never had a moon. Let's sit down here, she said abruptly. They were eating pomegranates, biting briefly into them and sucking on the sour juices. The moon had risen higher during the past hour, becoming a little smaller in appearance. It was a peaceful, contemplative scene. Jeanette snuggled up against Mark, thoughtfully tracing a design with fruit juice on his arm. This is fun, she said softly. So much more fun than the usual things a person has to do. Oh, you know, checking reports from the factory, making sure there is plenty of ammunition all the time, pestering the body manufacturers so you'll always have something decent to wear. Always watching or somebody will sneak in and blow up part of your shelter. Yeah, well, guess that's life. Jeanette sighed and picked up another fruit. It gets so tiresome, always having to keep on the lookout and fighting people. Don't you get bored by it? Sure, sometimes. It's got to be done, though. Otherwise you couldn't tell what might happen. Mark, Jeanette said hesitantly. Yes? Mark, would you shoot me if you found me outside your shelter? She looked coyly up at him. Well, sure, unless you had a proper government-authorised permit to be there. Mark turned astonished eyes on her. What else could I do? Oh, but you know I wouldn't do anything to harm your place. Oh, Jeanette, Mark said uncomfortably. Of course you would. Anybody would. If people started acting like that, the whole balance would be upset. She gently stroked his arm where the fruit juice had dried. Her face crinkled up and she giggled. Maybe you just don't know me. Let's talk about something else, Mark suggested. What's the matter? Do I shock you? Mark laughed and brushed his lips against her shoulder. Well, I'm pretty hard to shock, especially by you. See, she replied archly, you're just as antisocial as I am. Mark's face clouded. It's nothing to brag about, though. I'm not bragging. She sighed again and resumed her fruit. Eyeing it speculatively, she said, I guess I'm just bored with life, that's all. Sometimes things seem so silly, like all the times you have to get a new body. You'd think the manufacturers were giving them away free. Yeah, not like it used to be. Guess business is pretty good. Something ought to be done about it. Mark grinned mischievously. What do you suggest? Build another factory? Oh, you know you can't do that. Somebody is always blowing it up. Well, don't worry. In another 100 years or so, people will start dying off again. These proto-bodies aren't as serviceable as the manufactured kind. Yes, but if they keep producing new people in the decanting centres, what good is that going to do? I don't know. Blow up the decanting centres, maybe. Maybe, Jeanette said, glancing impishly at the man beside her, we ought to just stop wearing these silly old manufactured bodies entirely. Yes, Mark tasted a pomegranate, made a face and tried another. Just what do you suggest people wear? They could go around in their proto-bodies. What? Mark looked swiftly and searchingly at her, alarm on his face. Why, Mark, she laughed disarmingly, you're such a righteous beast, aren't you? Great atoms, Jeanette, he said, gazing intently at her golden-flecked eyes, wondering what strange things went on inside that lovely head. You mean go around all the time as if we were savages? Why, that's illegal, immoral, and besides, it's dangerous. Suppose somebody took a shot at you. You've only got one proto-body, you know. A clever fighter like you shouldn't have too much trouble with that, if you're careful, she said gaily, and I'm pretty good at that myself. Mark took a slow, deep breath as he decided that she was just teasing him. I'm surprised at you, Jeanette. She shrugged. I'm bored, I guess. I'd like to try something new, just for excitement. Personally, sometimes I think the whole social system we have is pretty silly anyway. Atoms, Mark mumbled. No need to swear about it, she chided him. Come on, Mark. Just think about it for a minute, and be consistent. Consistency is all right for a free Sci, he said. It sure doesn't do a proto-body any good. Jeanette laughed scornfully. I'll bet you believe all that stuff they feed you in the decanting centre about ancient history. Course not, Mark said defensively. All right then. Why follow all these rules of social conduct if there's no good basis for them? Oh, but there is, he replied seriously. There was a big war way back centuries before we were decanted out at centre. Huh, said Jeanette. Sure, and it was a whole lot of people who cooperated with each other in it. There must have been hundreds of them. It was an awfully big war. Hundreds of people all on one side, all fighting together against the other side. I don't believe it. It's true, I tell you, Mark insisted religiously. Hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe even as many as 1,000, all dressed alike, with clothes, I mean. And they didn't shoot each other, they just killed the people they were fighting, the hundreds of people on the other side. Other side of what? Mark frowned. Oh, I guess that is just an expression. But that's what happened anyway. Before civilization got started, people cooperated like that. That's just a whole lot of theory, Jeanette insisted. Nobody's going to make me ever believe people used to act like that. Besides, there just aren't enough people around to have all those mythical wars. Patiently, Mark continued. I'm telling you, Jeanette, this is more than theory. There are still some records left from those days. Prove it. All right, that's not hard. Somebody had to build the factories, didn't they? And the decanting centres? Robots. Who built the first robot factory? Jeanette considered. Then she shrugged petulantly. Oh, all right. Maybe a few people did cooperate, but not hundreds of them. People just don't act like that. Well, they did. And of course the obvious thing happened. Since they cooperated in some things, they cooperated in a lot of things, even fighting. That's how they could make war, you know, not the nice social sort of fighting we do now. And you can imagine what happened. You can kill an awful lot of people awful fast if a gang gets together on it like that. If they didn't have the artificial bodies and the psi transfer transmitters to make them come alive, there wouldn't have been anybody left after a while. That cooperation is rough stuff. Obviously, she commented dryly. Well, that's the reason for everything then. Pretty soon the factories couldn't turn out hypnobodies fast enough and people had to fight in their proto-bodies sometimes. But after a few centuries, the leaders began to get civilized and decided to put an end to all this cooperative killing. I guess they all got together and agreed not to cooperate with each other in anything in the future. It stands to reason, Mark concluded, people had to learn to be civilized. They weren't just born that way. It's culture. Poof, said Jeanette critically. All right, he growled, biting viciously into a pomegranate. Let's hear your big story if it's so good. Jeanette stretched out her legs and contemplated her wiggling toes. Oh, I don't know. I don't have any real ideas. But I know better than to believe that sort of nonsense. People just aren't like that, and you know it. She hesitated thoughtfully, then continued. Maybe a few of them got together now and then for a party or something like this, but not hundreds of them. When Mark did not reply, she laughed and said, I guess I'm just feeling risqué tonight. You sure are, he mumbled. Of course, there are parts of the old mythology that seem rather interesting, beautiful even. It's not mythology. Like the part that deals with marriage. She waited. Mark dutifully echoed. Deals with what? Marriage. Mark considered it. Then he shook his head. What's that? See, she taunted him. You don't know everything like you think you do. Marriage, she explained, was a sort of cooperative agreement that the ancient people were supposed to have entered into. Sure, just like I said, Mark stated with assurance. Hundreds of people did it. They got involved in this marriage agreement and made war on each other with it. What a dope. Marriage was an agreement between just two people. And that much I might believe. Hundreds is too much. It was hundreds, Mark insisted. It was not. It was just two. And what's more, it was between a man and a woman. They lived together with their proto-bodies and agreed to cooperate together, and they made children and took care of them until they grew up. Why, that's 30 or 40 years, Mark exclaimed. Even the wars didn't last that long. That's really nonsense. Besides, you can only make children in the decanting centres, and it's all done by machines. Well, maybe it is a little far-fetched, but I think it's cute. Humph. There was a few minutes' silence. Then Jeanette said softly, Mark? Yes? Mark, you like me a lot, don't you? Mark squirmed uncomfortably and stared at the artificial moon. Don't you? She insisted. More than you ever have anybody else? Well, guess that's right, he admitted lamely. A whole lot more than I should. She reassuringly patted his hand with her little one. That's all right, Mark. I won't tell anybody. Besides, I feel just the same way about you. Mark nodded without speaking, worriedly studying the vague markings on the bright luminous disk in the simulated sky. Mark, don't you ever want to see the real me? She inquired urgently. Don't you sometimes feel kind of empty because you can never really have me, know me, because all you ever see is a manufactured thing that only somewhat resembles what I am really like? Mark blushed. She had come a little too close to the uncomfortable truth. But he refused to admit it, at least to her. He mumbled an indistinct denial. Are you sure? She said, grabbing his hands, gazing intently into his eyes, forcing him to look at her. Wouldn't you sometime like to come down to my transmitter quarters? And see and touch my proto-body, the thing I really am? Oh, scared? Maybe I am. That's silly. Mark swallowed and said stiffly, Just because there is a no-fight clause in your invitation tonight doesn't necessarily mean I have to follow it, you know. You don't need weapons. I could strangle your proto-body easily. You wouldn't, she said confidently. You sure don't think much of me, do you?" "I just think the same of you as you do of me," she said simply. With impulsive hunger, Mark threw his arms around her, holding her tightly against him, nuzzling her, smelling the perfume of her hair, incoherently mumbling into her ear. "Jeanette, Jeanette," he sang. "I think more of you than anything. I love you. I know it's wrong, but I would never even shoot you because sometimes it hurts you and I wouldn't want you to feel even the slightest discomfort." He stopped, took a deep breath, and added meekly, "I'm sorry." "But Mark," she whispered, "why is it really so wrong?" "You know." "Suppose I told you that this body is my proto-body right now?" she asked earnestly. "But it isn't." "It is," she said faintly. Mark's breath hissed as he gasped. Jeanette was blushing all over her body, heightening the golden colour of it. He let her go and she slid off his lap onto the shadowed grass beside him. She bit her lip. "I didn't really mean to tell you yet." There was silence. Mark said quietly, "That's all right, Jeanette." "You aren't angry with me, are you?" "No," he said slowly. "Not angry." "Mark?" "Yes?" "Now that we're into this thing," she asked hopefully, "why don't we try this marriage agreement, like the ancients did? It seems like such a beautiful thing to do when two people like us. "I don't know." Mark shook his head doubtfully. "I just don't know about it." "Why not? You wouldn't have to really stay here. It could be just a secret agreement between us, and you could come and see me whenever you liked." "It all seems so unreal," he muttered. They lapsed into thought, both avoiding looking at the other. There was no sound except a faint sighing of wind in the leaves of the well-trimmed shrubbery. "Suppose," Mark said finally, "suppose other people started doing this thing, this cooperative agreement. Lots of people must want to, just like we do." "I suppose so," she admitted. "I went through this once before," he went on absently. "About 90 years ago I met this woman. She was awfully nice, clever, understood things. Not like you, of course, but still she was very nice. I thought about it then." "What happened to her?" Jeanette asked numbly. "She died after a while. She was pretty old. Oh, we didn't do anything," he hastened to add. "We kept it all on a perfectly moral and honest plane, never saw each other except at authorised government sex parties like this and all. Fought whenever we ran across each other outside. But I remember thinking at the time that some sort of agreement would be nice. We got along awfully well. I could never understand what she saw in me." "I can," Jeanette whispered. "This is just the same, only a lot more so," Mark went on thoughtfully. "And it's wrong. You know it's wrong. Suppose a lot of people started it. First thing you know, whole groups of people would be cooperating with each other again. And when they got into trouble outside or planned an innocent little raid on somebody's shelter, they would all work together on it. And pretty soon there would be other groups cooperating in fighting back again. They'd have to. And that, of course, would be the end of civilization. Pretty soon there would be nothing left and everybody would be dead." Jeanette did not reply when he stopped. She turned her head away, but Mark could hear her uneven breathing. "We have a responsibility towards society at large. We know it. We've been well educated and we aren't savages. Neither one of us can get away from it. It might be wonderful at first, but our conscience would come out sooner or later and the whole thing would be ruined." She rubbed her face with her cupped hands, shaking her head. "I suppose," she murmured unhappily. "You'd hate yourself for it after a while," he said. For a few minutes Jeanette stared at the grass before her feet, pulling up little blades of it one by one. Then Mark stood up and she flashed him a small, wistful, damp smile. Together they walked back toward the elevator, stepping quietly and almost furtively on the soft ground. "If it weren't for that," he started. "I understand," she replied quickly. Taking hold of his arm, she said, "I'm sorry." "Sure," Mark grinned affectionately at her. Come on, let's see if they've been having any good fights upstairs. They stepped into the elevator and disappeared. The artificial moon continued its regular motion through the simulated sky. Thanks for listening. Remember, there are hundreds more stories like these on the channel. I recommend going to the playlists to find standalones and compilations. And for even more, including other genres like fantasy, poetry, and mythology, head over to my Substack, link in the description. Oh, and go ahead and let me know what you thought of these stories in the comments. I love that my listeners share their opinions and connections with these old gems, so I welcome you to do the same. But for now, see you in the next one.